So you think you understand an iPhone, glass on the front, glass on the back, a chip somewhere inside, a battery, a camera, put it all in a metal frame, screw it shut, done. That's the mental model most people carry around, and it's not crazy. You've held one for years. You know what it looks like taken apart because you've seen the teardown videos. Screen, battery, board, done. Here's the problem. You're looking at the parts list, not the engineering. The truth is, an iPhone is not really a device. It is 1,000 impossible compromises, all fighting for the same 8 millimeters of space, and every single one of those compromises was a decision that cost someone money, time, or a working prototype that had to be thrown away. And once you understand that the phone isn't a collection of parts but a war over space, heat, and money, the entire economics of how it gets made and why it costs what it costs starts to make sense. Let's start with what people assume is the expensive part. Most people think the display or the chip is where all the money goes. It isn't, not exactly. The expensive part is fitting components that all want the same territory into a space that keeps shrinking every year. There isn't one type of smartphone component stack. There are several tiers competing for the same real estate. The battery wants to be as large as physically possible. The camera module wants more height for better optics. The chip wants more surface area to dissipate heat. And the frame wants to be as thin as possible for the visual language Apple has built its brand around. Every millimeter one of these wins is a millimeter the others lose. This is the same underlying question that shapes every other number in the device. Do you optimize for battery life, for camera quality, for thinness, or for thermal headroom? You can't max out all four. That single trade-off shapes everything else that follows. Now, here's where the naive model breaks down further. You'd think the most expensive single part is the screen. It's close, but the real cost concentration is the camera system and the chip package together. And for a very specific reason, tolerances. A camera module has to align a lens stack to the image sensor with a precision measured in microns, and if that alignment drifts during manufacturing by even a few microns, the entire module gets scrapped. Camera modules alone can run $30 to $80 depending on the tier, and a flagship phone often carries 3 or 4 of them. The chip is its own universe of cost. Apple's A-series and M-series chips are fabricated on some of the most advanced silicon processes in the world at 3 or 5 nanometers, where a single fabrication run at a plant like TSMC can cost hundreds of millions of dollars just to set up the photomasks before a single working chip rolls off the line. That cost doesn't scale down for a small order. It has to be spread across hundreds of millions of units, which is exactly why chip design only makes sense at Apple's volume, and would bankrupt almost anyone attempting it at a smaller scale. Now the design decision that trips up every phone maker. Do you seal the battery in permanently with adhesive, or do you make it removable? Removable feels safer. Repairable, upgradable, no glued-in cell that has to be pried out with heat and a suction cup. But a removable battery needs a rigid shell and a connector system, which eats space the battery itself could have used, and space is the one resource this whole device is fighting over. Adhesive-sealed batteries look like the smart engineering move: more capacity in the same footprint, a more rigid structural chassis, better water resistance because there's no removable panel to seal. Here's the catch. Once that battery degrades, which lithium-ion cells do predictably after 300 to 500 charge cycles, dropping to roughly 80% of original capacity, the repair requires trained technicians, specialized adhesive release tools, and heat, or the owner accepts a phone that increasingly can't hold a charge. Neither decision is wrong. But whichever one a manufacturer picks, they've locked in a permanent trade-off between repairability and physical density that follows the device for its entire life. Now, thermal and regulatory context. Because a chip doesn't exist in a vacuum, this is the decision most people get wrong when they assume a faster chip is simply a better chip. Roughly, the entire performance envelope of a smartphone chip is dictated by how much heat a body-sized aluminum and glass shell can dissipate into the air around it before the surface becomes uncomfortable to hold, which regulatory and safety standards cap at specific skin temperature thresholds. That's it. That's the real ceiling. Not raw silicon capability, thermal dissipation through a sealed shell with no fan. Inside that constraint, a chip capable of significantly higher sustained performance has to be throttled down the moment sustained heavy use pushes the surface temperature toward that limit. Push the chip harder than the shell can vent, and you've committed to a device that benchmarks brilliantly for 30 seconds and then quietly slows itself down for the rest of the session. Now we get to the part of this device that actually explains everything else: the chip's real-world usage pattern. Picture a coin flip, except instead of heads or tails, imagine every clock cycle of that chip falling into one of 2 futures. In one future, the chip is running at full sustained load, every core active, for the entire time you're holding the phone. In the other, the chip spends the overwhelming majority of its life at a tiny fraction of its peak capability, waking briefly for a notification or a scroll, then dropping back into a low-power state. Which of these 2 states is the chip actually in almost all day? Every day, it's the second one. And this is the single most important idea in the entire engineering of a smartphone. Measured across a typical day of use, a modern smartphone chip spends the overwhelming majority of its operating time in low-power idle or near-idle states, and only brief bursts at anything close to peak performance. This is exactly why chip designers spend enormous engineering effort not on peak benchmark numbers, but on how efficiently the chip can do almost nothing, because that's what it's actually doing nearly all day. The full throttle case that gets tested and marketed is the rare exception. The idle case is the actual product. There's a seasonal wrinkle here too, and it shapes the entire financial calendar of the company making the phone. A huge share of annual unit sales cluster into a handful of weeks after the September launch event, driven by upgrade cycles and carrier promotions, with a second smaller peak around the holiday season. That single stretch can hand the manufacturer a massive wave of upfront revenue and a corresponding wave of warranty and support obligations. But the same wave that comes in fast creates a supply chain problem that goes out just as fast in the opposite direction. Components have to be pre-ordered and manufacturing lines have to be staffed months in advance, based on a demand forecast that could be wrong in either direction. Get the forecast wrong on the high side, and you're sitting on unsold inventory of a device that depreciates the moment a new model is announced. Get it wrong on the low side, and you've left revenue on the table during the only real selling window of the year. There's a structural choice underneath all of this too. Design your own chip architecture from scratch, or license an existing instruction set architecture like the one from ARM. Licensing gives you a proven, compatible foundation, a massive existing software ecosystem, and dramatically lower upfront design risk. That's valuable, especially for a smaller manufacturer, but it isn't free. Architecture licensing requires ongoing royalty payments tied to unit volume, and it means every other licensee is building on the same foundational instruction set, which caps how differentiated your chip can really be at the architectural level. A company that designs its own core from the ground up keeps full control over the performance and efficiency trade-offs, but takes on enormous upfront research and development costs that only make sense if the unit volume is large enough to spread that cost thin enough per device. Now the psychology, because it matters just as much as the physics here. Why does a phone that's barely different from last year's model still get upgraded by tens of millions of people annually? Part of it is the optics of the camera bump and a marginally faster chip creating the feeling of a meaningfully new device. Part of it is what you could call a depreciation trap. Trade-in programs make upgrading feel closer to free than it actually is, smoothing over the real cost of constant replacement. And part of it is pure design psychology. The weight of a phone, the click of its buttons, and the resistance of its glass are all tuned deliberately, because a device that feels premium in the hand creates a perception of quality that a spec sheet alone can't produce. None of this is decoration. It's aimed at the same target, making the physical object itself feel worth the price before the user has opened a single app. And this connects directly to a real regulatory fight. Multiple governments have pushed hard in recent years on right-to-repair rules and standardized charging ports, arguing that sealed designs and proprietary connectors extend a company's control over a device well past the original sale. The European Union's mandate requiring USB-C as a common charging standard forced a redesign of the connector across an entire product line that had used a proprietary port for over a decade. Keep this in mind, because it tells you something important about the device you're holding. If the physical design of a phone were purely about engineering optimization, it wouldn't need regulatory intervention to standardize something as basic as a charging cable. The fact that it took government pressure tells you the original design choice was serving business interests as much as engineering ones. Before we get to what can go wrong, there's a hidden cost layer that catches almost every manufacturer off guard, and it has nothing to do with the visible parts. It's patents and codecs. Every smartphone touches a web of standard essential patents covering the cellular modem, wireless charging, and video compression formats. And using these standards legally requires paying licensing fees to patent pools, sometimes on a per-unit basis, sometimes as a lump sum. Skip this and the risk isn't small. Patent holders can and do sue for both damages and injunctions that can block a device from being sold in an entire country. A company that assumes its own chip design is good enough to sidestep these licensing obligations has quietly taken on legal exposure worth far more than the licensing fees would have ever cost. That's a smaller example, but it points to the bigger lesson here. Almost none of the real costs of a smartphone are the ones visible in a teardown video. They're buried in a licensing agreement, a regulatory mandate, or a supply contract nobody outside the company reads carefully. And plenty of things do wear down over time. Lithium-ion battery chemistry degrades measurably with every charge cycle, camera modules can develop dust contamination behind the lens over years of use, and the connector and button mechanisms wear from repeated physical use in ways lab testing under controlled conditions doesn't always predict. Now let's talk about whether a device engineered around this, many compromises can actually go wrong at scale, because the honest answer is sometimes yes. Consider what happened when a major manufacturer pushed the battery to thinnest trade-off past its safe margin. A competing flagship phone rushed to market to beat a launch window, shipped with a battery design that had too too little clearance inside its casing. Under normal charging conditions, that clearance issue led to internal short circuits, and in a number of documented cases, the batteries overheating and catching fire in the air on commercial flights. The device was pulled from the market entirely, and the company took a financial hit worth billions of dollars, not because the engineering team didn't understand battery chemistry, but because the schedule and design pressure pushed the physical safety margin thinner than the chemistry could reliably tolerate. That's the structural lesson underneath every one of these compromises. An engineering trade-off is never just an engineering trade-off. It's also a bet on how much margin for error you're willing to give up under commercial pressure. So how does a smartphone company actually make this work in plain mechanical terms once all these trade-offs are made? The core engine is simple. Unit volume times average selling price minus the fixed cost of chip design, tooling, and software development spread across every single unit sold. A cutting-edge chip design and fabrication setup can cost well over $1 billion in non-recurring engineering before a single working unit exists. Spread that over a production run of tens of millions of units, and the per-unit engineering cost becomes small. Spread it over a run of only a few 100,000 units, and that same billion-dollar design cost turns the device into a financial impossibility. This is exactly why chip design at this level only exists at the scale of a handful of companies on Earth. The fixed cost is enormous, and only enormous unit volume can absorb it. So if you put all of this together, here's what it actually looks like across a full product cycle. In the optimistic scenario, the thermal design holds, the supply chain forecast lands close to actual demand, no major patent dispute emerges, and the battery chemistry ages within its expected curve. Under those conditions, a flagship smartphone line can generate tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue on a healthy double-digit margin, funding the next chip generation and the next round of component tolerances pushed even tighter. In the realistic scenario, 2 or 3 things go wrong that aren't exotic at all. A key supplier has a yield problem on the advanced chip process, pushing costs up mid-cycle. A competitor undercuts on price in a key market. A patent dispute over a wireless standard drags on for years and results in a settlement nobody saw coming. Under those conditions, the same product line can slide from a comfortable margin into a much thinner one, even while the device sitting in hundreds of millions of pockets looks exactly the same as it did on launch day. And almost none of that swing shows up as a dramatic visible event. No recall, no scandal necessarily, just a slightly tighter margin, a slightly delayed next generation, and a slightly heavier legal bill, compounding quietly until the number at the bottom of the balance sheet looks nothing like the plan. So if you ever hold one of these in your hand and think it's just glass, metal, and a chip, remember the one thing that actually determines whether it exists at all. It was never really about fitting the best parts into the smallest space. It's about how many impossible trade-offs a company can make at a scale large enough for long enough without any single one of them breaking.